The millionaire's daughter had never walked until he caught the nanny in the act and couldn't believe his eyes. There are moments in life when we believe we're in control, that every step has been planned, every dream carefully mapped. But fate, like an unseen storyteller, waits patiently in the wings, then twists the plot without warning, tearing apart our blueprints and forcing us to rewrite everything from scratch. For Elena Carter, life had once been a carefully drawn map, but the most important chapter, the one with meaning, had vanished, leaving behind a cold, aching emptiness. At 25, Elena had been a top nursing student at a Brooklyn community college. A bright-eyed girl with gentle hands, she dreamed of working in a hospital, caring for patients recovering from trauma. But life doesn't ask what we want. When her father passed away from a sudden stroke, everything collapsed. Medical debt piled up, her mother sank into depression, and her 17-year-old brother still needed school and support. She folded away her dreams of white coats and stethoscopes and took on whatever job she could find to keep a roof over their heads. She waited tables, cleaned houses, scrubbed floors, and then, like a sliver of unexpected light, a kind neighbor referred her to a wealthy family looking for a nanny for a 4-year-old girl. "She's not like most kids," the neighbor whispered. "She doesn't talk, doesn't walk, lost her mom in an accident a year ago. You interested?" Elena hesitated. Being a nanny wasn't what she wanted, but rent was due. Her mother needed medicine. Her brother needed books. She didn't have a choice. That morning, New York wore a gray face, clouds thick as a morning veil. Elena took the one train uptown to the Upper West Side, hugging a worn canvas bag filled with a homemade lunch, her resume, and a handful of scattered hopes. As she stepped out of the subway, she entered a different universe. Pristine sidewalks, towering steel and glass buildings, luxury cars neatly lined up, boutiques where a coat cost more than her entire month's rent. Elena felt out of place, as if she'd stepped into someone else's dream, but she kept her head high and walked on, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Ethan Blake, 33 years old, was living inside a bubble of privilege and pain. His penthouse on the Upper West Side, built of glass and steel and overlooking Central Park, was a perfect reflection of his meticulously curated life. As the CEO of a successful architecture firm, he was known for his talent and his arrogance. Wealth and power had turned him into a cold, skeptical man who no longer cared about others. But in his perfect world, there was one blind spot: Sophie, his 4-year-old daughter. Ever since the accident that took his wife's life, Sophie had fallen into a strange, silent state. She didn't speak, didn't walk, didn't respond. Despite being seen by the best specialists in New York and beyond, no physical cause was found. "It's psychological trauma," they said. "She needs time." But as time passed, the pain only grew deeper for both Ethan and Sophie. The death of Anna had taken the best part of him. Once a man who knew how to smile and care, Ethan had become a machine, a man addicted to control. In less than a year, he had fired 3 nannies. The last one, a child psychologist, was let go simply for suggesting he spend more time with his daughter. "I work so she can have the best," he shouted. "Don't bring that emotional nonsense into my house." He refused to accept the truth, that the problem wasn't Sophie. It was him. Only one person saw it clearly: Grace Blake, his mother, a strong, kind woman with a heart full of quiet wisdom. Heartbroken at seeing her son slowly wither in loneliness, she took matters into her own hands. On the recommendation of her manicurist, she contacted a young nursing student named Elena Carter, who had recently started taking nanny jobs due to financial struggles. One brief interview, one look into Elena's sad, spirited eyes, was enough to move her deeply. That morning, Ethan was reading a project report when the intercom buzzed. His mother's voice rang out gently. "She's here, Ethan. Her name is Elena. Be kind to her." He switched off the intercom without replying, his jaw tightening. Another nanny. Another failure waiting to happen. The private elevator door slid open. Grace stepped in with her usual warm smile, and beside her stood Elena, looking like a fragile butterfly about to be crushed. "Ethan, this is Elena. Elena, my son." The first glance was electric, and not in a good way. He looked at her from head to toe with quiet disdain. She, though timid, held a quiet strength that unsettled him. Her eyes were like a deep well, filled with sorrow, exhaustion, and a flicker of hope he couldn't comprehend. Her presence, simple, honest, felt like a slap to his perfectly polished world. "Welcome," he muttered flatly. Sensing the tension in the air, Grace stepped in. "Ethan, go on to your office. Elena, come with me. I'll give you a tour of the house. And, of course, introduce you to little Sophie." Ethan stood, didn't look back, and walked straight into his office, slamming the door shut. A chill ran down Elena's spine. What she thought would be an opportunity now felt like a nightmare. But when she met Grace's encouraging gaze, she took a deep breath. She was here for her mother, for her little brother. She would not give up. The penthouse, with its sleek modern furniture, expensive wall art, and breathtaking views of the city, felt more like a luxurious tomb than a home. There was no warmth, no life, just layers of glamour piled atop a deep emptiness. With a gentle gesture, Grace led Elena down the hallway to a quiet room. "She spends most of her time here," she said softly, "in her own little world." The room looked like a child's dream, high-tech toys, giant stuffed animals, and a princess-style bed. But at the center of it all sat a small girl with dark hair and sad eyes, curled up in the corner, clutching a worn-out plush rabbit. So tiny, so heartbreakingly alone. Her name was Sophie, and her silence echoed through the room, louder than any sound. Elena felt a tight knot form in her throat. That child was a mirror, a living, breathing reflection of her own pain, though born from different wounds. Sophie was trapped in a golden cage. Elena had spent her life fighting just to survive. But in both their hearts lived the same hollow ache, the same unspoken loss. The door creaked open as if what lay beyond needed to stay untouched. Elena stepped inside, and for the first time, she saw Sophie. The little girl sat on a cream-colored rug, hugging a worn-out teddy bear, her eyes unblinking as they stared out the window. Her fine blonde hair was gently tousled, and her gray eyes held a sadness so heavy it seemed to quiet the air around her. There was no sound, no nursery rhymes, no giggles, no musical toys, just silence, thick, heavy, and aching. "Hi there," Elena whispered, crouching a few feet away. No reaction. Elena slowly placed her hand on the rug, feeling the softness beneath her fingertips. She pulled a picture book from her bag. "I brought a storybook. Do you want to see it?" Still no answer. Sophie remained focused on the world beyond the glass, as if everything real, everything safe, was somewhere out there, somewhere without pain, without memories. Ethan stood at the door, arms crossed, like a statue guarding a silent kingdom. "She hasn't spoken in a year," he said quietly. "After her mother's accident, it was like she disappeared. Just make sure she doesn't hurt herself, that's all." "She needs more than that," Elena replied, voice soft as breath. Ethan glanced at her, wary. "Don't think you can save anyone here, Miss Carter. This isn't some feel-good drama." Then he turned and left, leaving Elena in the still room with a silent child and a storm of emotions she hadn't yet named. Elena didn't know whether to cry or smile, but then she looked at Sophie and recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same one she'd seen in the mirror after her father died. The same one her mother wore when she stopped eating. The same one her brother tried to hide when he thought no one was watching. That silence, Elena realized, wasn't empty. It was a cry for help no one had heard. The first days passed in a heavy, suffocating silence. The echo of Elena's footsteps through the sprawling penthouse was often the only sound. Ethan carried on with his life like clockwork, morning workouts, back-to-back meetings, endless emails. Her presence in his home was like that of a ghost. He saw her, but didn't truly look, spoke, but never conversed. Their relationship was cold, distant, defined by boundaries he never let her cross. Ethan Blake, a man who prided himself on being the sole pillar of his household, simply ignored the nanny's existence. That indifference brought Elena both relief and anxiety. Their interactions were brief, tense, filled with curt nods and sharp glances. One morning in the kitchen, Elena was making fresh juice for Sophie. Wearing a plain apron, her face calm and focused, she stood bathed in the warm sunlight pouring through the window. Ethan rushed down the staircase, his tie askew. He paused, and for a fleeting second, he saw her, and something about that moment stunned him. It looked normal, domestic, like a family, something he once had and had lost. He quickly turned away, scowling deeper. "What are you doing?" he barked. "Strawberry juice for Sophie." "It's her favorite," Elena replied without turning. "Don't give her strawberry. She's allergic," he snapped. "But Mrs. Grace told me," Elena started to explain. "My mother doesn't know everything," he cut her off. "Make orange juice instead." He grabbed an apple and walked out without another word. Elena stood frozen, tears stinging her eyes. She knew for a fact Sophie wasn't allergic to strawberries. It was something Anna, Sophie's late mother, had once confirmed in passing to Grace. Ethan wasn't protecting his daughter. He was lashing out at the only person he could still control. Still, she made the orange juice, but the bitterness of humiliation stayed with her all day. And yet, slowly, Elena began building a quiet bridge to Sophie. The little girl who once sat silently in the corner now started to watch her with curious eyes. Elena never forced her. She was simply there, singing gentle lullabies, reading stories with silly voices, and most of all, touching her. Her touch, soft, maternal, became the only language Sophie would accept. Then, one rainy day, the skies over New York were gray, and rain drummed steadily on the penthouse windows. But Elena refused to let the weather decide the mood. After lunch, she sat on the floor as usual, laying out a thin mat in the middle of the room. She placed a few stuffed animals on it, one she carried in the old bag she always brought with her. "We're having a little concert today," she whispered, her voice as gentle as the rain. Sophie sat as always, holding her teddy bear, eyes fixed on the window. But Elena didn't mind. She picked up a tiny hand puppet, and her voice shifted, cheerful, playful. "Hello, I'm Mr. Dinosaur. Anyone in my way will be achoo." She fake sneezed so hard that she fell backward, legs kicking wildly in the air like an overturned beetle. It was ridiculous, absurd, and it worked, a tiny he, soft as a breeze, but it was laughter. Elena sat up quickly. Sophie had covered her mouth, as if even she didn't believe the sound had come from her. Her gray eyes were wide, startled, and then another giggle, slightly louder, still quiet, but real. Elena said nothing. She just smiled, continued the puppet act, this time to make Sophie laugh again. At the same time, Ethan, working in his office, heard the sound through the cracked door. He stood abruptly, confused, unsure if he'd imagined it. He stepped out, following the delicate thread of sound, the laughter he hadn't heard in a year. And there, in the room, he saw it. Elena, lying on the floor, legs in the air, performing a ridiculous dinosaur show, and Sophie, his daughter, was lying on top of her, eyes bright, lips curled, shoulders shaking with soft giggles. Ethan froze. The scene was simple, peaceful, but to him, It hit like a fist to the chest. It had been so long since he'd seen her like that. His eyes stung, part joy, part guilt. He didn't walk in. He quietly stepped back, closing the door without a sound. Back at his desk, he stared at the unfinished architectural plans. But they meant nothing now. Only that laughter echoed in his mind, once ordinary, now more precious than anything he'd ever built. That morning, the first sunlight after days of rain filtered through the massive windows, casting golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. The penthouse felt brighter somehow, but the air was still heavy with tension. Elena was in the playroom with Sophie. Lately, the little girl had begun showing signs of awareness, glancing over during stories, occasionally moving her lips as if to respond. Small steps, but full of hope. Today, Elena decided to try something different. From her bag, she pulled out a large therapy ball, a piece of equipment she'd kept since her nursing school days. She knew the routine. Have the child sit on the ball, hold them gently, and move slowly to activate core muscles and balance. At first, Sophie tensed, but Elena was patient. "It's just a game," she whispered, "like sitting on the moon." Bathed in slanted morning light, Sophie sat atop the ball, hugging her teddy bear, gently rocking as Elena guided her movements. Tiny legs began to engage, her back straightened ever so slightly. And then the door slammed open. Ethan stood in the doorway, eyes wide, face flushed with anger. He saw his daughter on the large therapy ball, clutching her bear, while Elena steadied her from behind. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared, voice booming with fury. Elena froze. Sophie immediately recoiled, clutching her teddy tighter. The ball came to a stop. The room turned to stone. "This is a basic therapy technique," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I learned it in school. It helps Sophie." "You're a nanny, not a physical therapist?" Ethan snapped, storming into the room. "I've hired the best specialists already. You think you can do what they couldn't?" Elena took a step back. Shame flushed through her face. She took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to help. She needs to move. She's making progress." "No one asked you to do that," Ethan said coldly. "Don't risk my daughter like this again." He stepped forward, lifting Sophie off the ball. The little girl trembled, clinging to his shoulders, burying her face into his neck. Elena watched, her chest tightening painfully. Ethan left the room without another word. Suddenly, the space felt hollow, as if all the air had been sucked out. Elena stood still, hands resting on the soft ball, once a symbol of hope, now the reason for a storm. A single tear fell, then another. She wasn't crying because she'd been yelled at. She cried because a door had just slammed shut, just when it had started to open. Ethan carried his daughter upstairs, gently placed her in her crib, and hummed a lullaby. One Anna used to sing, but his heart was in turmoil. The image of Elena, strong, steady, and full of hope, unsettled him. Not because she had hope, but because he no longer did. He felt like a failure, a powerless father. Anna's death hadn't just taken his wife, it had taken his belief in dreams, his sense of direction. And now Elena, with her quiet strength and relentless will, was like a mirror reflecting every flaw he tried to bury. He sat beside Sophie's bed, watching her sleep. Her little face, long lashes, soft pink cheeks, reminded him that life, even when it hurts, can still hold beauty. He stood, grabbed his phone, and called his assistant. "Cancel everything this afternoon," he said. He needed space, to think, to fix what he had broken. He made his way downstairs. In the kitchen, Elena stood at the sink, washing dishes, her back to him. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, and her eyes, though she tried to hide it, were red from tears. He approached slowly, awkwardly, ashamed. "Elena," he said, his voice rough. She jumped slightly, wiping her eyes in a rush as she turned. I'm sorry, he murmured, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to speak to you like that. It's just, I'm scared. Those simple, raw words washed over her like a balm. For the first time, she saw beneath his hardened shell a father lost, a widower drowning. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They held pain, real pain. I understand, Mr. Blake, she said softly. I only want to help. He lowered his head. I know, and I was wrong. I need your help. I need you to help me help my daughter. He extended his hand, an act of surrender. From a man who had spent his life in control, it was a moment of real courage. Elena didn't hesitate. She reached out and took it, gripping it firmly. There, in the middle of the kitchen, between half-washed dishes and unspoken grief, a reconciliation was born. And with it, a spark of hope, a fragile bloom growing quietly from hardened ground. From that day forward, things inside the penthouse slowly began to change. Not overnight. There was no magic switch that turned Ethan into the perfect father, but little by little, the cold began to melt. He started coming home earlier, first by a few minutes, then by hours. He no longer locked himself in the office all day. Instead, he would step into the playroom, quietly watch Elena read, occasionally smile when Sophie pressed her lips together to hold in a laugh. One evening, as Elena was building a castle out of blocks with Sophie, he sat down beside them, awkwardly picking up a wooden piece. "Where does this one go?" he asked gently. Elena blinked in surprise but kept her face neutral. She pointed. "There, on the left. That's the castle tower." Ethan tried to fit the piece. Wrong, second try. Still wrong. Third try. The block slipped and knocked over half the castle. He stared, wide-eyed, at Elena, then at Sophie. And then his daughter laughed, clear and real. For the first time, Ethan laughed too. From then on, he started asking Elena more questions. How was Sophie today? What food did she like most? Do you like to draw, Elena? His questions were clumsy, but sincere. Elena responded, sometimes briefly, sometimes with stories about her mother, her brother, about late nights in their tiny Brooklyn apartment, where survival meant sharing everything. One evening, while the three of them sat at the table, no more Ethan eating alone in his office, he asked quietly, "Is your family doing okay?" Elena looked up. A simple question, but coming from Ethan, it felt enormous. She nodded. "They're getting there. My mom is stronger now. My brother's about to graduate high school." Ethan watched her, his gaze far off. "You're strong. I've never met anyone like you." Elena smiled, just a little. But inside, something warmed, not from the compliment, but from the way he said it, not as a boss, but as a man learning how to connect. After dinner, as part of their new routine, they tucked Sophie into bed together. Elena read the story. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, occasionally chiming in with silly lines that made Sophie giggle. When Sophie fell asleep, they didn't rush out. They stayed, in silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Elena looked around the room, once a silent castle, now filled with light, laughter, and hope. She turned to Ethan. "You know," she said softly, "she's not just learning how to walk again. She's learning how to live again." Ethan nodded, eyes moist. "So am I." That weekend, a heavy storm rolled in. The skies over New York turned nearly black, and rain pounded the city in waves. Thunder roared in the distance. Lightning flickered across the windows, as if nature itself was echoing the pain still lingering in the Blake household. The three of them sat in the dimly lit living room, huddled together. The scent of wet earth, the steady rhythm of rain, and the distant growl of thunder created an atmosphere that was both melancholic and strangely intimate. Sophie, trembling with fear, buried herself in Elena's arms. Ethan, noticing his daughter's distress, sat down beside them. He reached out and gently took Elena's hand, a small gesture of comfort. And for the first time, he began to speak of Anna, his late wife. "She was the most incredible woman I've ever known," he said, his voice breaking. "She was full of life. She had dreams. She was the light of my world." Elena said nothing. She just listened, her eyes misted with emotion. She understood. He needed to say these words. He needed to release himself from the weight of grief and guilt that had been silently crushing him for so long. Ethan spoke of the accident, of the guilt, of the nightmare of losing the woman he loved. "I used to be arrogant," he admitted. "I thought money could fix everything. But then I lost her, and I nearly lost my daughter too. I became someone else. Elena, a monster, a man I didn't even recognize." Elena leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. A simple hug, but sincere. The kind of embrace only someone who truly understands pain could offer. "You're not a monster, Ethan," she whispered. "You're a father who got lost, but you're trying to find your way back, and that's what matters." Ethan clung to her. And then the tears came. The tears he had held back for far too long. They fell quietly, like the rain soaking into the roof above them. The storm passed, and with it the pain began to ease, just a little. Ethan and Elena, now bound more deeply than ever, sat quietly with Sophie between them. What had started as a fragile connection, born from loss and burden, was slowly becoming something more, something deeper, something real. That afternoon, Central Park basked in soft golden sunlight. The leaves had begun to change color, rustling in the breeze like whispers of old stories. Elena and Ethan sat on a bench while Sophie lay on a thin blanket, playing with her usual teddy bear, her eyes following the kites dancing in the distance. Ethan sighed, eyes fixed on his daughter. "My little girl," he murmured. "She's like a broken piece slowly coming back together." Elena was quiet for a moment, then gently asked, "Have you ever thought about seeing a different kind of specialist for Sophie? A new approach?" Ethan turned to her, brows slightly furrowed. "We've seen the best in New York, tried everything. Nothing changed." "But what if it's not her body that's stuck?" Elena said softly. "What if it's her heart, her spirit? I read about a pediatric therapist in Seattle. He combines physical therapy with music, animals, emotions. He's had real results with kids frozen by trauma." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of hope, but also fear. "What if we fail again?" "But what if we don't?" Elena said, taking his hand. "What if this gives Sophie the chance to run, to jump, to live the childhood she deserves?" He squeezed her hand gently. There was something about the conviction in Elena's voice that made him feel a spark of light inside his chest. "We'll go," Ethan said after a pause. "Seattle, right?" Elena nodded. And so, a week later, the three of them boarded a plane headed west, not with certainty, but with a fragile yet fierce hope. In Seattle, on a misty morning, they arrived at a small clinic tucked beneath towering pine trees. Dr. Jonathan Rivera greeted them with a gentle smile and a warm handshake. After the initial conversation, he knelt down to Sophie's level, extended his hand, not forcing, just waiting. Sophie looked at him, and for the first time with a stranger, she didn't pull away. "She doesn't need fixing," the doctor said after the examination. "She needs to be heard." He confirmed it. There was no neurological or mechanical damage. Everything was a defense response from deep trauma, a fear so intense it froze her body into stillness. Elena teared up. Ethan said nothing, but nodded. "We can work with this," Dr. Rivera said. "Not quickly, but it's possible." Ethan looked at Sophie, then at Elena, the woman who had lit the first candle in the darkness he and his daughter had lived in. And for the first time in over a year, he believed hope was real. Seattle woke in mist each morning, but for them every day carried light. That little therapy center, with its soft guitar melodies, birdsong from the woods beyond, and a golden retriever named Maple, trained to hug the children, had quietly become Sophie's second home. In the mornings, Ethan brewed coffee while Elena tied Sophie's hair into 2 tiny braids. They didn't say much, but the glances they exchanged spoke of something sacred growing between them. Sophie didn't speak, but she'd begun to hum softly, following the rhythm of therapy songs. She didn't walk, but she crawled, sat up by herself, reached out for toys on her own. Every tiny motion made Elena blink back tears, and Ethan couldn't hide the silly, proud grin always plastered across his face. One sunny day, Dr. Rivera invited them to a nearby park for Sophie's first outdoor therapy session. Elena laid out a blanket. Ethan set up a small tent. Sophie sat between them on the grass, hugging her teddy bear, eyes glimmering beneath the afternoon sun. "Let's try something new," Elena whispered, gently holding Sophie's small hands. Sophie looked at her, not afraid, just waiting. Elena lifted her carefully. Sophie's legs trembled, her back curved slightly, but she stood, really stood, on her own 2 feet, in a moment as delicate as sunset light. And then, a step, unsteady, tiny, timeless, enough to freeze the air around them, to make the whole world go quiet. Elena gasped. Ethan froze. Sophie looked at them both, then smiled. Another step. Then she tumbled into Elena's arms, bursting into a giggle, the kind of sound that had once vanished into grief. Ethan couldn't hold back his tears. He dropped to his knees and wrapped both of them in his arms. Elena cried too, not because Sophie had walked, but because the little girl had chosen to walk toward them. In that embrace, among the green grass, the warm sun, and the scent of earth, they were no longer 3 broken people. They were a family. They returned to New York on a gentle autumn afternoon. The penthouse no longer felt cold or distant. What once resembled a mausoleum of memories had come back to life. On the table were Sophie's messy drawings. On the floor, plush toys scattered like witnesses of a child finally living. Elena stepped into the kitchen, now always scented with toasted bread and filled with the soft hum of the morning radio. Ethan knelt by the window, planting herbs, something he once considered a waste of time. Sophie, her legs still wobbly but stronger with each day, ran in zigzags across the living room, calling out, "Elena!" Not loudly but clearly. Every day felt like a miracle. One afternoon, the 3 of them sat on the balcony, sharing a bench, gazing at the sunset. No one spoke, only Sophie's soft humming, an old therapy tune, and the quiet rhythm of hearts beating in peace. "You did what no one else could," Ethan whispered, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You saved her. You saved me." Elena smiled, saying nothing. She didn't need the words. She'd felt them in every soft touch, every glance, every wobbly step. The next day, Ethan took them to a special place, a small house in the suburbs with a white porch and a garden full of lavender. "I bought it," Ethan said, "because I want Sophie to have a real childhood, and because I want you to have a real home." Elena stood still. Sophie ran through the garden yelling, "Bear! Bear!" as if calling her beloved stuffed toy. "And I was wondering—" Ethan hesitated, then pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Simple, elegant. "I'm not asking out of obligation. I'm asking for a chance. Will you marry me, Elena Carter, be the mother of my daughter and the rest of my life's love?" Elena didn't answer right away. She walked to Sophie, knelt, and wrapped her arms around the giggling child chasing butterflies. Then she turned, tears in her eyes, but a smile on her lips. "I've been all of those things for a while now, Ethan Blake." She took his hand and nodded. And so, among the lavender blooms and the laughter of a once silent child, a promise was made, not a perfect one, but the kind made by people who had been broken, yet never gave up on hope. Life moves in circles. Pain, hope, love, healing. They follow one another like seasons. And their family, Ethan, Elena, and Sophie, stands as proof that fate can be cruel. But nothing is stronger than a heart that dares to hope and refuses to surrender. Their love story was a ballad, one that didn't begin with passion, but with brokenness. It didn't continue with roses, but with tears. And it didn't end with happily ever after, but with a quiet choice to love each other every day, in the ordinary moments, in the smallest of things. Because hope, in its purest form, is the only thing that can truly heal all wounds.